What I want to do now is talk with you about a conceptualization of complex or formal organizations. And I think what you're going to see is that this particular framework or perspective is going to be sensitive to different ways of conceptualizing organizations, all of which are important. Not all of which are emphasized equally by any particular individual or for a particular situation, nor should they necessarily be weighted equally in a conceptualization. Right? For a manager, for example, you'll notice that for certain issues at certain times, there will be certain elements that we're going to identify tonight that will be particularly important. But there's no Bible about this kind of stuff. And just like you as individuals are in fact the most important resource that you have to offer to clients, your biographies, your values, your personalities, your interpersonal skills, right, your levels of sensitivity and creativity and intelligence and dedication, those are the most important things that you have to offer to clients. Whether that's in a clinical role, whether that's in a management role, whether that's in an advocacy role, whether that's politics or whatever. Right? As a manager, those things are also equally important. And they're going to begin, if not dictate, they're going to strongly shape how and what you see as important from the kind of elements that you're going to hear me talk about in just a few seconds. Right? So that in the end, I think what you're going to see is a framework, a template that's going to provide for an incredible amount of flexibility, an incredible amount of creativity. You're going to be able to fit yourselves into this particular template in ways that give you plenty of elbow room without having to share any of that space with anybody else here in the class, because everybody will fit somewhat differently in this kind of thing. And if you were to master the elements that are a part of this framework, you would still find yourself extending outward from the person that is within, choosing to use and to emphasize different elements in your work. Okay? So just as two brilliant psychotherapists could sit with the same client, and the client would have very, very different experiences, right? Two individuals in very, very comparable kind of organizational roles in agencies that are undergoing very, very similar kind of circumstances might very appropriately and effectively deal with those issues in quite different ways, but still intelligently, in ways that were theoretically sensitive, in ways that were professionally sound, and in ways that are ethical. Okay? Now, I'm referring to this particular framework as the Prismatic Organization. And you know what a prism is, and you know what it does, right? You take white light, which is essentially invisible light for us. You force that through a prism, and the prism breaks it down into different components. We then see the different shades, right? What I'm going to offer to you is a way of looking at organizations, okay, that frankly are going to differentiate between different levels. The level of the individual, the level of the group, the level of the formal organization itself, and what I refer to as the interorganizational collective, or that is that system which from a general systems or open systems perspective would be thought of as the whole. That whole itself composed of a variety of organizations, right? And when we look at the whole as our focal system, then what is conceptually from a systems perspective, what is any one of those organizational members? It's a subsystem, isn't it? Right? But it's the whole that is alluded to right here. Now, the way we're going to do this is to use this kind of design element. All right? You'll see what this is going to mean in just a second. Remember, an organization can be thought of as emphasizing any one of these particular levels of inclusiveness. There's a Latin term, qua, Q-U-A. Anybody ever heard that? Anybody take Latin in high school? All right. It means like in the essence of or something like that. So we might talk about the organization qua individual. That is the organization that's essentially drilled down as and then defined as a collective of individuals. Right? We might think of the organization as a group, organization qua group, where in this case we think of the organization as a collection or collective of groups. We might think of the organization qua formal entity. The organization is some kind of organic, indivisible whole. Or we might think of the organization as a subsystem of a broader interorganizational collective. Right? That's where we're going with this kind of thing. But we'll start at the level of the individual. Okay? Now, if you're thinking organization qua individual, right, we're essentially saying that the more you know about individuals, the more you know about organizational phenomena. Now, as I mentioned before, my undergraduate study was in sociology and anthropology, and I'm afraid that in addition to giving me some insight into collective behavior, that experience also provided me with a bias, right? And maybe a little bit of hubris. Read that, arrogance, which is to say that if you can't see the collective there, if you, like typical Americans, because we're psychologistic in terms of our orientation, our culture is as well, if you emphasize the individual, you're losing sight of the broader picture. Well, to some extent that's true. But the older I've gotten and the more experience I've had in organizations and the more experiences I've had as a manager, administrator, and also as an employee subject to the vagaries of my bosses, the more I return to the importance of recognizing that individuals make one great big difference in organizations. All right? So here's the first warning that I have for you. Right? Here's the first 25 cents of content that's worth quality in this class. Don't lose sight of individuals and organizations either. Organizations can make individuals can make one great big difference to organizations. Right? Think about President Stanton. Right? Were you aware of the respect that man had and has as a leader of this institution? My gosh, that doesn't come automatically just because somebody gives you the key to the president's office, right? You have to earn that kind of thing. And having earned it, there's currency there. Right? There's power there, right? Had somebody else been selected to be president of this institution over these many years, right? Do you think it would have been automatic that he or she would have been as successful or would have earned that level of respect? No. Individuals make a difference, right? Think of the best boss you've ever had. Right? Picture that person in your mind. Think about the qualities that made that person so special for you. Okay? Feeling good? Hold on to those feelings because the roller coaster is about to go down. Now what I want you to do is I want you to think about the worst boss you've ever had in your life. It's probably easy to picture that person. Now, take the dagger out of your visual image there, right? Take it out, right? Think of the qualities, think of the behaviors that are associated with that person that are indivisible from that person and that make it so clear why that person was the worst boss you've ever had in your life. You think individuals make a difference? You sure as heck do, okay? Let's take a look at what some of the other variables are here, okay? What we're going to see among the body of theory that exists here that can be related to organization qua individuals, right, is an important recognition in the organizational theory. And that is the need for individuals to be differentiated within an organizational population. That is to say, don't you want to be identified, don't you want to be known as a unique individual even among your classmates? Don't you want to be known for the individual that you are in the place where you work? Wouldn't you like your individual contributions to the work of an organization to be recognized and for you to be valued as the author of those particular contributions? Those are very, very natural expectations on the part of people in a workforce. They're very natural expectations for people who are members of an organization. Okay? Now remember that term differentiation, because we're also going to see that sometimes people will identify with something greater than themselves or larger or more inclusive than themselves. And when they're doing that, they're actually wanting integration, right? They're wanting to be seen as reflecting the identity of something that's much greater, much more holistic and encompassing than what this calls for. All right, you're in a clinical concentration, right? Is it possible to want A and to want not A at the same time? Is it possible for people to not be entirely rational? Yeah, it's possible, isn't it? Okay. Are you familiar with the concept of niche or niche, depending upon how one wants to do it? Marcia, I saw you nod. Right. What's your understanding of niche?
To kind of have your own special thing, your own special area that you fit in, or your own special thing that you're good at.
Cool, cool. Yeah, and when you're talking about area, you're not just talking about location, are you? Or maybe not geographic location necessarily, but like a social location, right? Yeah. The notion of niche here is that people will attempt to find an accommodation within organizations where they can be most comfortable. Now that's not necessarily really I'd love to vacation here kind of comfortable, because what it also can include for some individuals, for example, is a relative invisibility from observation by folks that might be critical of them or of their performance. So part of a niche element could involve some level of physical or social disturbance or something that might be uncomfortable, but yet provide the accommodation from a fear or from an anxiety that an individual might have. Right? It's interesting that as you came in, you didn't do what I would normally do. I usually go right to the back of the class and that's where I sit. All right? I've been doing that for years and years and years and years. And so then my challenge as the professor is ask you to come up here, kind of thing, right? That notion of coming into a classroom and then just sitting kind of in the rear, probably over there or something like that, represents an effort at kind of trying to organize a niche for people who are so inclined, okay? Everybody gravitates to some kind of niche. Everybody in an organization is to some extent relatively successful, relatively unsuccessful, but makes the effort to establish a niche within the organization. Now, that becomes particularly important if we think of the concept of psychological contract. There's an organizational theorist by the name of Chris Argyris, who is one of the individuals responsible for this concept. Has anybody heard of the psychological contract before? Right. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear me say again and again and again in this class is that there's a difference between the formal organization, the way organizations are supposed to be structured, the way organizations are supposed to run, the way people are supposed to do their work, the way people are supposed to report to one another, the way communication is supposed to flow. right? A variety of those kind of things. There's always a variation on that. Organizations always function somewhat differently than the way they're designed to function, the way they were intended to function, frankly, the way they were even structured to function, right? Psychological contract is going to begin to get to this kind of thing. Think back when you were applying for the job that you have right now. If you don't have a job right now, think back to when you were interviewing for the placement you have right now. If you're not in a placement right yet, think back, all right, but you are in a job right now, so I got it. Do I have everybody squared away now? All right, not yet. Okay, think back, ready for this? We're going to go a little bit far afield here. Think back when you were talking with somebody about an intimate relationship that you were exploring engaging in with one another. A marriage, for example, or a long-term relationship, right? Now, think back of those kind of things, and I'm going to ask you this. Is there anybody for whom the reality was identical to the commitments or the promises that were made to you? That's right, all right. Kind of a ludicrous question, isn't it, right? Right? It never happens, right? The psychological contract speaks to the understanding that the individual has as to how his or her membership with an organization is going to play out. What kind of responsibilities that self is going to have. What kind of liberties that self is going to have. What kind of freedom, what kind of constraint that self is going to have. How that self is going to be rewarded. How that self is going to be challenged. What the experience of the organization is going to be like for the self, right? Now that psychological contract is really developed in the interviews or discussions that go on during an employment process, during the orientation and training process once one's hired. It goes on as well as the individual begins to engage in relationships with people who have been in the organization, peers who've been in the organization longer than that individual has. And they begin to develop an expectation of what their membership in that organization is going to be like. Now notice the psychological contract does not refer specifically to the signed contract for employment or membership that a person has. That's a different thing that contributes to the psychological contract, but the psychological contract is generally much more expansive than that. Far less legalistic, but far more psychologically and emotionally sensitive to the individual. Right? Now, is there an implication for an organizational member when that person begins to find that the promises that are a part of the psychological contract are not being respected and observed by the organization to whom that individual is now committed? Think back when that starts to happen to you, right? This is a pretty good MSW program. This is a pretty good MSW program, and this is an exceptional university. But I'll bet you there have been times where the MSW program disappointed you. I'll bet you there have been times when the university has frustrated you or angered you, right? And when you think back about it, was that you bumping up against some kind of violation of the psychological contract that you had constructed and that perhaps you'd even been encouraged to construct when you were part of that kind of, I don't know, gee, I'm in love with this organization kind of process, where you're being courted by the organization and making decisions to become a member to it? That's psychological contract. Boy, that really speaks very powerfully about how individuals figure in organizations. And oh, by the way, there's a constant across all of you. It's a constant degree plan, isn't there? There was a single set of criteria that each of you met as you applied for and were accepted into this particular program. all right? All that stuff is constant across different members, right? Is your psychological contract the same as yours? Is that the same as yours? Is that the same as yours? They're all different, aren't they? The psychological contract is all different, different from one person to another, even if you have the same job description, even if you have the same title, even if you work in the same office. Okay. Now, one thing to remember as a prospective manager is that psychological contracts are really important to the people who hold them, okay, to the people who created them. That doesn't necessarily mean, and it certainly doesn't mean really, that you're obligated to recognize and to honor every element of that as a manager. As a matter of fact, you'll go nuts if you try to do that. But by the same token, if you ignore the importance of the psychological contract to the people with whom you work, you'll likely be perceived as an insensitive individual, an individual who doesn't really know his or her subordinates within an organization. It will affect your ability to lead. Okay? We come back again to the organization qua individual. There's a fellow by the name of Portnoy who actually wrote in the business circles a number of years ago. And he wrote this really wonderful little book, kind of a guide to leadership in business. If it were still in print, I'd be requiring you all to read it. It was that good. And one of the things that Portnoy says is in business, just as in any kind of leadership, there are 3 essential competencies that the leader must be able to demonstrate to people who he or she sets out to lead. And among these are interpersonal competencies and ethical competencies. You're going to see the third one in a little while. But among the 3, interpersonal competency and ethical competency. Interpersonal competency speaks to your ability to engage with others in a way that's sensitive, in a way that moves process forward, right? How gifted you are in the interpersonal arts, basically. Ethical competency speaks to your ability to recognize ethical and moral issues, your ability to dissect these kind of issues, your ability to prioritize, and your ability to engage with others in ways that demonstrate appropriate ethical conduct. Think back to the individual I asked you individually to identify as the worst boss you've ever had. All right? Everybody remembering who you pictured? Okay. Take the knife out again. Okay. All right. For how many of you, show of hands, how many of you would argue that that particular individual had weaknesses in terms of their ethical compass? Show of hands, please. Almost everybody. Almost everybody. How many of you would argue that that individual that you have in mind, you ready for it? Take the knife out of the image, all right? Had problems in terms of the way in which they engage their social skills? Show of hands, please. All right? Look at that. Everybody. Everybody. Okay? That begins to suggest how important this is. But just to drive home the point, think now, we're going back to happy place. Think, picture the individual who is your best boss. Your best boss. Okay? Show of hands, how many of you regard that person as having serious weaknesses with their ethical compass? Not a one. How many of you would regard that individual as having serious problems in terms of their interpersonal interactions? You getting an idea of how important being an ethical, effective human being might be to being an effective leader? Yeah. Okay. Much literature in leadership, particularly as it came out of World War II, toward the end of World War II. All right? And one of the things that was a signature of a lot of this leadership studies was the understanding that leadership is a reciprocal process. Sure, leaders affect the behavior of followers. That's what leaders are supposed to do. But you know how many leaders actually do that? They find that their own behavior is affected by the behavior and the sentiments and expressions of the people who seek to follow them. That is to say that leaders who want to push too hard, push too fast, if they don't have the other social supports to buttress that, will find that they're not leading at all. Leadership is constrained by certain expectations, certain fundamental demands on the part of followers as well. So there's some level of reciprocity that's a part of this kind of thing. Okay. What's the common element through all of these kind of things? It's that we're talking about the importance, the role, the effect of an individual on other individuals in an organization. And we're not necessarily talking about a boss. The example was about a boss, right? Now here's one where I'm going to ask you to be very, very disciplined. Don't look at anybody except me. Just look at me, okay? Right? Just look at me, right? Think about your peers in the MSW. Look at me. Think about your peers in the MSW program, all right? Is there a certain individual that you regard as really positive and really important in this program that really helps to make this program worthwhile for you? Not if there is somebody like that, okay? Many of you are naughty, okay? It's not a professor, is it? It's a fellow student, right? So we don't even have to be talking about boss and subordinate relationships here. We can be talking about peer relationships here and still talking about the importance of ethical competence in the way people relate to one another, interpersonal competence in the way people relate to one another, the informal leadership that exists within and across people. And what we're going to see is this is going to lead us to our next level here in just a second, all right? Because when we're starting to talk about leadership among peers, we're starting to talk about the informal group that occurs at that point in time, all right? Do you find that your psychological contract is influenced by your friends or by student leaders, for example, as that contract relates to your membership in this program? Yeah, it probably does. And does that same kind of phenomenon happen in the world of work when you're talking about fellow employees and the way folks relate to an agency environment, for example? Sure you are. Sure you are. Right? As a matter of fact, one of the things that we see happening when people try to unionize a workforce is we see individuals try to exert leadership and exert influence so that there can be new ways of thinking about management versus labor, new ways of thinking about equity in the distribution of work, in the distribution of risks, in the distribution of rewards, et cetera. Right? So there can be a lot of effort on the part of individuals to change the way individuals think about their organizational surround. Now, the notion of this then is to say that once one understands the role of the individual in an organization, conceptually, let's just fold that right up here. Think of a hinge right here, right? So that if we fold everything we know about individuals at the level of group, we know something about that group process. We know something about the composition of the group, right? For example, what's your academic major? Social work. Good choice, good choice. The questions will get more difficult on the quiz, but perhaps not too much more, right? What's your academic major? Social work. What's your academic major? Social work. What's your academic major? We could do this a lot, right? 16 times or something like that. In the end, I'm going to say, wow, this is a class of what? Social work majors, right? So in a sense, what I've done is I've taken what is a characteristic, a temporal characteristic of one individual, found out that it's the same for everybody, and now I begin to label the group in terms of that particular characteristic. Okay? Okay, what's your gender? Female. You don't, by the way, just make one up if you really want to. I'm not trying to be too intrusive here, all right? What's your gender?
Female.
Okay, what's your gender? What's your gender?
Female.
You know I'm coming to you, don't you? Right? What's your gender? Male. Okay, so we know that the group composition is mixed with regard to gender. Minimally so, but mixed. Right? So we can begin to construct an understanding of what the group is like just based upon individual characteristics. Right? But in the end, okay, that leaves us with this little sticky wicket right here. Right? Now from a systems perspective, and we'll talk more about this later in the semester, but quite early in the semester, we're going to refer to this kind of thing as the emergent characteristics of a system at that particular level of understanding. Notice that we've started at the bottom, the least inclusive level of systemic inclusiveness, the individual. We're moving up to something more inclusive theoretically, the group. We've accommodated a lot of what we understand of the group by virtue of individual characteristics of the individual members, but still, from a systems perspective, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Okay? The whole is more than just the sum of the parts. This leaves us with these emergent characteristics. Okay. From an organizational perspective, what are some of these things? Here's some of them. All right. Well, the workplace is a social setting. Have any of you ever made friends at work? Sure, right? Have any of you ever invited friends back from work to your home or your apartment? Have you ever recreated with them, gone to the movies with them, played ball with them, had a party with them, whatever? Sure. The workplace is a place where people meet a variety of their social and socio-emotional needs. That's a reality of many, many work sites. Right? It's not the same across different work sites for different people. It's one of the ways that work sites and even networks or cliques or groups within even a single organization vary. What we'll also see is that the physical demands and the physical setting of work can profoundly affect the ability of people to satisfy or express socio-emotional needs at the workplace. Right? If you're sitting in a cubicle all alone 8 hours a day, the only time you see other people is when you get out to go to the bathroom, when you walk by their cubicles, or when you spend 30 minutes together down in the cafeteria. Isn't that a whole lot different than being a part of a think tank, right? Or working at one of these great computer companies where you get to play games and go down to the spa, and oh yeah, you're supposed to talk work occasionally when you're down there, right? Really, really different kind of environments. Okay. The role and importance of leadership within the ranks. This is where I said that notion of leadership would lead us to the groups, right? Think how important the experience of being a part of an organization is if you find yourself an informal leader of your peers within that organization, right? As opposed to somebody who's largely discounted, who's largely powerless. Think how differently your membership in an organization is experienced by you if important peer leaders value you, as opposed to largely ignoring you or using you for their own advancement or their own privilege, right? Think how important the experience of an organization is for you as you relate to others of your own organizational level, your peers within that organization. Okay. Leaders within the ranks, peers, can be very, very important individuals in assuring that your needs are met, your socio-emotional needs are met within an organization. They can make it possible for you to continue within an organization without feeling really, really, really alienated, strung out, abandoned, desperate. All right. That's what this is beginning to speak to. Right. Again, leadership is a reciprocal phenomenon. Right. How are responsibility and authority delegated within the organization? Right. Now, part of this can be formal, part of it also can be informal. As natural work groups arise, well, how are the roles of members of the work group differentiated? Who does what? Anybody watch Big Bang Theory? Can anybody not watch Big Bang Theory? It's just a phenomenally good show. Phenomenally good show. It's fun to watch those four scientists / geeks interact and to see who's providing leadership at any particular time and how they're perceiving their role within that network of friends, but also a network of work peers, right? Sheldon has shared with them that he's their social glue. You see that episode? Without him there, they'd all fall apart. They wouldn't know what to do. All right? Remember Leonard's response to that? What the hell are you talking about? I don't know if I can say hell on the video, but we can always delete those kind of things. All right? All right? It's important for a member of a work group, an informal work group, how his or her peers see that individual, what they look for that individual to do, not just technically, but particularly interpersonally, in terms of support, in terms of followership, in terms of leadership, in terms of loyalty, those kind of things, right? And the neat thing is, from a kind of an analytical point of view, is that if somebody is satisfied with the way those particular responsibilities are accorded them, and they're pretty good at doing those kind of things, the informal events in that informal group can help them feel more satisfied as a member of the organization, even if their pay is no higher or their title no more exalted than that of another individual, right, who perhaps doesn't have the same level of comfort, the same level of satisfaction in terms of the informal process of the group that they're experiencing. So what I'm saying here in brief is the experience of the informal group, it can be absolutely critical as kind of a mediating, but also as a kind of a supplemental experience for individuals in an organization. Right? Quite apart from anything that the manager may be trying to do, but a manager who isn't wise to that or aware of that may not be able to understand why certain groups are effective or why certain groups are motivated, why certain groups are happy, why certain groups are alienated, why certain groups are troubled, or why certain groups are inefficient and impotent. Right? All kinds of things going on in terms of the informal group here. Okay? As a manager, let me ask you this. Let's say you've got 6 people working in your office. And these are people who aren't working in individual cubicles. They get to talk with one another. They share responsibilities. There's a sense of team there, right? What or who are you managing? Are you managing 6 separate individuals? By the way, the answer is yes. Are you managing a single coherent group? By the way, the answer is yes. You're doing both. You're doing both, right? Is managing a group different than managing an individual or even 6 individuals? The answer is yes, right? So here it is. The more you develop a sensitivity to and the skills to engage both at the level of the individual in ways that are transparent and equitable and yet differentiated, boy, that's tough, right? And at the same time recognize that there are other times where you're actually interacting with everybody or with individuals as a member of a group, as opposed to not just an individual, but as a member of a group, right? The manager who can do both of those things, is sensitive to both of those dimensions, is probably a much more effective or potentially effective manager, leader, administrator than somebody who thinks only one way or the other. We'll talk about the different kind of groups later on. Okay? Oh, by the way, if you're sensitive to group process, does that mean that you also might want to be sensitive to what's going on in the life of the group? Its norms, its leadership patterns, what it expects of its members, right? Its politics, its levels of affinity or whatever. Yeah, some level of sensitivity and knowledge of that would probably be appropriate. Oh, and by the way, if you're the formal manager, administrator of a work group, you might go out drinking together. You might go out partying together. But chances are there are different layers of membership to that group, and you're not part of the innermost layer. And you can't be. Because if you're writing the effectiveness reports, if you're the one that has to determine who gets the merit increase and who doesn't, right? If you're the one who's true to the need to discipline certain individuals for problems in performance, that will alienate you from the more intimate layers of membership within that group. That's just a reality now, right? And if you try and wedge your way in, one or two things is likely to happen. One, you'll find out that groups have a way of trying to push you back out, protect their own boundaries, if you will, right? And the second thing is that what you will probably do is invalidate yourself as the formal leader of the workforce, right? So my advice to you right now would be don't even try. Don't even try. Be sensitive to those kind of things. Value your employees. Value the level of welcome and invitation to participate in the life of the group that they offer you. But by the same time, right, one, be careful of how deeply you tread into those kind of things. And secondly, don't try and bull your way in. Chances are you're not going to be effective, and chances are if you were effective in doing that, you're not going to be effective in the formal role for which you've been hired in the organization. Okay? So much of this as well speaks to the importance of transparency, the ability to invite and permit participation on the part of workers into their own work-life space, empowering people, even in the agencies. There's a, who was it? Might have been Perot, might have been Mechanic, number of organizational theorists, but one of them along the road introduced the concept of lower participant. Lower participant, right? A lower participant is a person who's relatively powerless and whose formal job position or formal job status is located pretty far south on the organizational hierarchy. Lower participant of an organization. Right? To the extent that even lower participants in organizations can have some voice in terms of their own jobs, for example, you may be able to encourage a kind of a buy-in, a kind of a commitment to the organization. And of course, in social work, our values on client self-determination, let's don't confuse this. An employee is not a client, right? If you're a supervisor, the people whom you supervise are not your clients, right? But the principle of empowerment and the principles of equity and the principles of transparency and the principles of voice still apply, but they have to be shaped by the recognition that there's a different kind of organizational framework here, different set of expectations when we're talking about employees and supervisors as opposed to clients. Now, plenty of other things that one could talk about in that area, right? But when you do that, and you put what we know about the individual and couple that with this stuff that we're now beginning to become aware of with regard to emergent characteristics. Think of that as the whole, right? Now you have a better appreciation perhaps of organization as groups, organization qua group. Now look what's going to happen. Same kind of thing. We build the hinge right here. We fold this up to the level of formal organization. And what do we have? We have an understanding of the formal organization in terms of what's provided by individuals. Smartboard, touched it. There we go. We have an idea, not touching this time, we have an idea of understanding what happens at the level of formal organization from incorporating the emergent characteristics of the group into this. But same basic principles of systems theory apply. We're still left with the emergent characteristics of the organization at this particular level. Now, without negating the importance of individuals within the organization, without negating the importance of recognizing that group dynamics occur and that groups occur, formal and informally, within the organization, let's look at just some of the emergent characteristics at this particular level of groups of organizations now. And among these, and in no particular order, we can see that this level, this type of emphasis of organization leads us to focus on rational, workable structure, organizational structure, tables of organization, different offices, different occupations, different divisions and departments, how each reports to others, right? We're talking about goals. We're talking about formal rules. So the emphasis on formal structural variables, and we'll spend some time in class, really stems from this level of emphasis on organizations. And notice, I want to repeat, without without violence to the notion that individuals are still important, without violence to the notion that groups still exist, this focus here, this emphasis here, places different, higher emphasis on formal structural characteristics of an organization. If you're reading in the sociology of organizations where much of this literature takes place, this is a primary emphasis, right? In social psychology, it's level of groups, more. Psychology, motivational theory, also level of individual. Okay. Organizational coupling is a concept. Very briefly, how closely connected are different parts of an organization? For example, how closely connected is social work to chemistry? We're in the same college, by the way. We're in College of Arts and Sciences, all right? If something happens in chemistry, does that necessarily mean that we are affected by it? Not a bit, right? Some things maybe. Chemistry student goes berserk over there, okay? Professor gets beat up. This is just by way of an example, right? The dean gets concerned, the president gets concerned for the welfare of all professors, as they should, right? And so social work then is required to implement some kind of protective protocol for professors because a chemistry prof got beat up. It could happen, but chances are, if somebody's upset in the chemistry department, we don't even hear about it, right? If somebody's rewarded in the chemistry department, we don't even hear about it. If chemistry wants to do something in terms of their policy for promotion and tenure of faculty member, we don't even hear about it, right? Chemistry students get TO'd in terms of some kind of lab protocol, we don't even hear about it. What am I trying to say? Chemistry, social work, we're very loosely coupled, even though we're part of the same overarching college structure, right? Now, on the other hand, If you're building a nuclear weapon, right, don't you want to know that the widget that you're putting next to this bomblet is really, really precisely and correctly manufactured before you stick it in there, right? In social service agencies, some agencies want to know very, very precisely who it is who's walking through the inner doors. So you walk in from the sidewalk and you sit down, and here's a list of questions, and unless you answer those questions in a very precise way, you don't get to walk through the next set of doors. The different departments are very tightly coupled to make sure that whatever happens over here can accommodate what walks through the door. That much of the variability is in fact kept away from the innards of the agency. Right? Organizations embed different levels of coupling in their internal structure. This is something that's kind of an emphasis here. Technical competency. Remember Portnoy? Remember I said there were 3 different competencies that Portnoy regards as critical for leaders. What were the other 2? What was interpersonal and ethical, right? Interpersonal and ethical. Now we have the 3rd, technical competency. Now this is an acronym that's been around for decades. I learned about it in public administration. I think that's probably where it originated, but you'll see it in business, you'll see it in a variety of other organizational and administrative disciplines. POSIS Corp, and I repeat it several times, stands for the different functions of the executive, which is to say, these are the different arenas within which this level of formal organization calls for technical competency. P, ready for this? Planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, budgeting, evaluating. Planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, budgeting, evaluating. Think of that best supervisor you ever had. Is that a person who was pretty good at doing at least most of those things that you knew of? Chances are they probably were, right? Person can be interpersonally quite adept. Person can be very ethical. That will help gain support. It will help gain popularity. That person may also be technically incompetent with regard to critical features of management. You'll still like the person. You'll still hope for the person. Okay? You still enjoy being with the person. And you're going to recognize sooner rather than later that that's not the person who should be in that particular leadership position. Right? Should be something who combines those 2 qualities and then adds the 3rd. Now, as I mentioned before, in this class, we're going to be dealing with 2 fundamental kind of things. One is developing a kind of an overarching appreciation and level of sophistication with how to think about organizations. And then we're going to spend a lot of the time building the fundamental skills in the administrative arts. And guess what those are? Here. Some level of planning, some level of organizing, understanding some of the issues having to do with staffing, right? Beginning to understand a bit about directing and coordinating, reporting, budgeting, evaluating. Okay. I'm going to say one other thing. Broom and Yeton here, right, wrote a really, really interesting article about decision making, how leaders in organizations particularly, or leaders of groups, and this can be informally, but particularly how leaders in formal organizations make decisions. And in the end, they're going to come out in favor of what it's very, very much the kind of overwhelming emphasis in today's social science, and that is the contingency model, which is to say no one method of decision making works best. Depending upon the situation, different kinds of decision making are probably used, are in fact used by effective decision makers, and will yield better levels of decision than might other alternative decision making modalities. For example, with executive decision making, I'll just go real quickly. All right. Let's say that we're going to make a decision, and I'm going to talk about the four of us right here, all right, four of you. Let's say that if there's the wrong decision, only one person's going to suffer, okay? Cecily's going to suffer, all right? Only one person actually has the knowledge to make a good decision. Look what's just happened. There's only one person who has the knowledge to make a good decision, but if that decision's wrong, only one person is going to suffer from it. So here's the question. Even though all four people are part of the organization and we're all in favor of participation and empowerment, etc., who should make this decision? Should all four? Should it be a vote? The one person who knows best? Perhaps, right? Perhaps there should be some level of consultation with the one person who's likely to suffer if the decision's wrong, but still the final decision will be made here. That's a possibility, right? Or maybe it's these two will consult, and then you will inform the other two, and you'll act only if there's agreement between these two. See, there's a variety of ways that one could pursue this thing based upon a variety of parameters. Broom and Yeton identify a variety of these, identify a variety of different kind of combinations of decision making that could accrue, suggest under certain conditions which yields the highest level of our quality of decision. All of this kind of traces back to, again, part of it is technical competency, right? And the way organizations are supposed to be set up. When one begins to appreciate these emergent characteristics, adds that to the other things we understand about organizations so far, you get an idea of what happens in the formal organization. And then, and we're winding down, folks. We're winding down. Let's step up one more. Let's take all of that knowledge, organization qua individual, organization qua groups, organization at its own level of systemic inclusiveness, and then recognize that organizations exist within an environment of other organizations. And it's entirely possible for us to conceptualize networks of organizations as the whole. If we do that, any one particular agency, any one particular organization is simply a part of the whole. No matter how well we explain it, it's only a part of the whole. And what's left? You know what's left? That is emergent. What are those emergent characteristics? Very quickly. How can we be very quickly with that many? All right. Well, watch. All right. The environment becomes critical. Now we're talking about the environment of a particular organization, and we're talking about the other organizations within which it interacts, and we're talking about even the environment within which that collective has existence. How interdependent are the different organizations within this network, and how interdependent are they between the collective and the environment, even the broader environment within which they exist? Are resources plentiful or are they limited? right? In social services, we might think, oh my gosh, we're always, always, always strapped for money, and there are always more clients than we know what to do with. But the reality, that's not really true necessarily. Sometimes a lender, and by that, not just really a lender, a grant authority, government, or whatever, a foundation, might have money to give. They're looking for agencies to come forward who have access to a particular target population, for example. And in situations like that, you might find a potential recipient, right? But what you might also find are 2 or 3 different agencies fighting for access over a very small number of individuals who would help them gain leverage to that money, for example. Right? Can you imagine, for example, here in Northeast Tennessee, if there were funds available to work with Yemeni immigrants? Well, there might be some Yemeni immigrants around here, but there probably aren't very many. Right? There might be a lot of money available for an agency if you're going to work with Yemeni immigrants. Now, that's not just hypothetical. Well, that case is hypothetical. But the fact is that there can be relatively few clients available, and different agencies will fight over them. Probably what will also happen is that there'll be ways of not just fighting over them, but parceling them out. You deal with them on this particular problem, we'll deal with them on this particular problem. We'll work out some kind of cooperative arrangement, and we'll both try to feed at the trough of whatever money is available. That may be also a thing. We'll talk about steady state and organizational change, but basically what this amounts to is that as the environment changes, organizations will change. Membership in interorganizational networks may change in order to maximize the, not necessarily the effectiveness, but the survival of organizations. Right? Here we're talking about the importance of outside decision makers when we're talking about interorganizational collectives. Right? Is it possible that your organization might have absolutely critical decisions made about it by people who aren't part of the organization? Sure, happens all the time, doesn't it? You're looking for money from United Way. United Way distributes a position paper with regard to its interest in funding programming with regard to a particular population around a particular problem, right? All of a sudden you find that the organizational decision makers in your organization just can't wait to provide services to that particular population around that particular problem, when you never even heard any mention of those folks or those problems in days past, right? It was a decision that was prompted by events outside the organization. Happens all the time, right? A variety of things, all that speak to the role of organizations embedded within networks of other organizations. Put it all together, an understanding of the place of organizations conceptually as simply a part of greater systems than themselves. Now, do it all together, right? Put it all together. Simultaneously have at your command the ability to emphasize one element or several elements based upon the issues you're dealing with, the people that you're dealing with, the time that's available to you, the particular skills that you have, the particular orientation you have, the particular experience that you have, and your own preferences. Okay. That's a beginning framework for understanding organizations. And there are different layers, there are different levels of complexity, and how individuals make for powerful differences at one level and can hardly even be seen, perhaps, at a different level. Right? But your role as a manager or your role as an administrator remains constant. You have the same position. You have the same responsibilities. You have the same boss, if you will. So the key is to develop a versatility in the conceptual tools you can bring to the job. Marry that with some level of mastery for intervening at organizational process at any one of those levels, right? And with this class, what we'll try and do is give you some sensitivity to those kind of issues. Some conceptual tools, some beginning foundation skills, right? And hope. And then you develop over time the resources so that after you leave here, you'll continue your mastery of this kind of stuff for the jobs that you have and the positions that you want and the person you want to be, the professional person you want to be. All right. Sound interesting to you? Yeah. Sure. I mean, rhetorical question, but actually, does it sound interesting to you? I mean, I really hope it does. I really hope it does. A number of years ago, I had a student in a class, very much like this that I was teaching, who told me that the experience for her was transforming. She'd had a very, very difficult experience in the agency where she was working. She had been blamed for a major failure in that agency. And this is a student that I knew as an undergraduate and knew to be a very good student and I thought would be a very, very good social worker. And here I was now working with her in her master's program in this class. And she told me later on that when she was in the class, for the first time in her life, she was able to see how she had been set up for failure, how there were certain organizational variables, and part of which was particular choices her manager, her supervisor had made that had basically condemned the program before she could even get it off its feet. And the realization that she herself was not really responsible for this, despite what she had been said to her, lifted a weight off her shoulders. It may not happen for you, probably won't happen for you. But if there's a gem in here in this class for you, reach for it. Okay? Let me help you with that.